What's the most chilling, unexplained, or paranormal thing you've ever witnessed with your own eyes? When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. We had an apartment on the top floor where we would hang out, and we often went up to the roof to smoke. One night, we were about to head up, but I had to pee, so I told him I would meet him there. After I finished, I went up the stairs to the attic area that connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to see. It was an old building, and the attic was always cluttered and creepy. As I was making my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop messing around. The shadow passed by me a few more times, and then I heard my friend's voice coming from downstairs. He had gotten a call from his girlfriend and had been in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out. I told my friend what happened and said I did not want to go back up there. For context, it was not my own shadow, since the only light up there was from my phone, which I was holding in front of me. It also was not someone breaking in, because the door locks from the outside, and the next day my friend checked in daylight and found no one there. Story 2. I was playing outside with my Barbies, a favorite activity, when I was around 5. I looked up and saw a young girl about my age in a pretty dress with lace and a ribbon tied in her hair. Her dress looked old-fashioned, the Sunday best kind, with neat, polished shoes. She just stared at me. I was about to talk to her, but my mom called me from the house. When I looked back, she was gone. I am still not sure who or what she was. Story 3. Growing up in a very old house, we had lots of strange experiences. My family still talks about the spirits or whatever they were, though they mostly seemed to calm down as we renovated more of the house. It felt like they knew it was less and less their place. Nothing was ever menacing, just odd and sometimes terrifying. There were benign things, like the dryer turning on by itself, which my mom jokingly called her helper spirit, since our machine was old and sometimes had to be run twice to get clothes dry. 2 instances stand out the most. The first was when I was playing in my room. Nothing unusual had been happening. We had a cheap fake wood shelf filled with books, toys, and knickknacks. I was playing in front of it when it exploded. I do not mean like a bomb, but everything suddenly flew off the shelves and scattered everywhere. Oddly, nothing hit me. I remember being mad at my parents when they came to check after hearing the noise. They did not believe me and just told me to clean it up. The second story involves my brothers and was a shared experience. That lasted some time. Often we would see shadow people in the house, sometimes together, but one seemed to visit me frequently, especially in the bedroom that seemed the most active. There always appeared to be a shadow man standing in the doorway watching me. He had no features, just a dark outline of a man. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes and opened them again, he seemed closer. Some nights, I would just stare at him for what felt like hours, looking for any imperfections to convince myself it was just a shadow or my mind playing tricks. I only ever closed and opened my eyes enough times for him to reach near the edge of the bed once. I remember being scared and often screamed for my parents, though I never felt truly threatened, just cold, which could have been from the poor insulation in our 100-year-old house. Years later, when we finally renovated that room, we ripped up the carpet and underlay to find old black and white linoleum tiles. Near the door, off to the side, was a strange human-sized stain. Finding water damage was not unusual, but as soon as I saw it, I instantly knew something had been there. Strangely, it did not feel like a thought. I just seemed to be told. Story 4. A couple of years ago, my friends and I were having a sleepover at one of their houses. There were about 8 of us. Late at night, as a joke, we decided to lock one of our friends, Luis, outside. He walked around the side of the house to look in through the windows. As he ran past one of them, we saw what looked like our friend Ben running behind him. That alone would not have been a big deal, except that Ben came out of one of the bedrooms about 5 seconds later to see what was going on. Everyone else was inside watching, so whoever was running behind Luis could not have been anyone else. To make it even creepier, when we let Luis back inside, he asked how Ben got back in so fast, because Ben had been with him outside. We still refer to it as the anti-Ben. Story 5. I lived in a pretty rural area as a kid. Every once in a while, we would hear an owl calling. My dad would grab his flashlight, and us kids would follow him on a little hunt to try to find it. When I was 10, my dad was diagnosed with terminal small cell lung cancer. 2 years later, he died in a hospital bed. That night, when we pulled into our long driveway, our mercury light was out for some reason. My sister turned on her brights, and there was a huge brown owl sitting on top of our airboat, staring at us. That boat was my dad's pride and joy. We stared at the owl for about 5 minutes before it finally flew away. I am an atheist and have always assumed it was just a coincidence. but still, what a coincidence. Story 6. Several years ago, I had a dream where I was looking at a black and white photograph that looked like it had been taken in the 1940s or so. It showed 3 women standing side by side in front of a fence in what appeared to be the backyard of my childhood home. The first woman was someone I didn't recognize. The middle one was me, and the other was a casual friend of mine who had moved to another state. As I looked at the photo, I heard a voice in the dream say, "In 1 year's time, one of these women will be dead." When I woke up, I didn't really know what to make of the dream, except that I had a very strong gut feeling that it wouldn't be me who died within a year. A few months later, the friend who had moved out of state posted on Facebook that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I immediately thought, oh, it's her. I never said anything about the dream to anyone, least of all to her. But because of it, I started keeping in better touch with her through Facebook and her Caring Bridge journal. We began exchanging cards and letters. I'd send her small care packages, and she'd send me copies of the comic books she drew. I don't know if any of that would have happened if not for that dream. She did pass away though. Miss you, Leah. Story 7. I've had strange experiences my whole life. Here are a couple that really stand out. When I was a kid, there was one night when I wasn't feeling well, and I woke up to an old woman in a blue dress pulling my covers up and stroking my hair. For some reason, I didn't feel scared at all. I asked my mom about it the next day, and she found a picture of my great-grandmother, long deceased, wearing the same blue dress she had been buried in. It was definitely her. I once lived in a foreign country that had experienced a lot of war and violence, especially against indigenous people, and I knew my apartment was haunted. Regularly at night, empty water bottles would be thrown around my bedroom. The lights would turn on in the middle of the night. I'd hear footsteps walking, doors shutting, and similar things. One night, it got especially creepy when I felt a heavy weight pressed down at the end of the bed, like someone sitting there. I went to a local market to buy sage or something, and the woman who sold charms refused to sell me any, saying I was cursed to walk among them. I ended up moving a couple of weeks later, and everything stopped. I moved into an apartment about 5 years ago with my boyfriend that also had unusual activity. One night I was home alone, on the phone with my best friend, when suddenly the TV turned on at maximum volume, scaring the hell out of me. I screamed, turned off the TV, and started explaining what had happened when, across the apartment, both the bedroom and bathroom doors slammed shut. It was winter, and there were no windows open. I immediately left and didn't return until the next day. A lot of other things happened there too, which I can get into if anyone's interested. After we moved out, we did a little ghost hunting while the apartment was empty of furniture. We got responses, and I have them recorded. Story 8, I was having a horrible dream about being stabbed by the beaks of small, tiny dinosaurs. They were foaming at the mouth and had an insatiable hunger for my blood. I woke up in a fevered sweat, contemplating how utterly real the experience felt. I could still feel the aching pain in my back. Whoa, what a friggin' close one that was, I thought. I shifted in my bed, trying to find that cooler, fresh patch of blanket that wasn't soaked in my body heat and sweat. In doing so, I revealed the true culprit, one mighty breaded chicken wing prodding into my back. It's true what they say, one ought not to indulge in the kernel late at night. Story 9, UFO stuff. I grew up on the outskirts of Oregon, deep in Clatsop County on logging roads. Out in that part of the land, there's no light pollution, and on a clear night, you can really take in the cosmos. As a family, we would spend nights outside on our house's rooftop and stargaze, shooting stars, satellites, and pointing out constellations. Stepfather would have my brother and me go back inside when the satellites would start to dance. We were probably around 7 to 13 years old at the time, and never really understood what he meant. As I got older and more rebellious, I'd sneak out at night and wait for these satellites to start dancing. But nothing ever happened. Skip ahead a bit. When I was 10 years old, I witnessed what I thought was a plane flying over a hill our house overlooked. Thinking it was strange, I asked my stepdad, "Should there be a plane out here?" He said, "No, there's never any air traffic over here. The airport is closer to the city." I kept watching, curious. After a few seconds, it seemed to just stop. I asked again, "Should a plane just stop in the air?" He quickly replied, "No, planes can't just stop mid-air," and that was that. I watched it sit there for about 15 seconds. And then the light vanished. About a week later, my older brother left to go camping with friends. On the second night, something truly terrifying happened. I used to sleep in a sleeping bag. Never again. I went to sleep in my pajamas, zipped up snug and warm. My mom was working at a military surplus store at the time and had gotten me the bag. It was one of those that zips all the way up and covers your head like a hood. At some point during the night, I woke up in absolute panic, drenched in sweat, dizzy and disoriented, unable to see. I thrashed around until I found a wall and started pounding on it as hard as I could, until my mom came down and unzipped the bag. I was upside down inside it, all bare, soaked in sweat and freezing cold. She first said my brother must have done it, then remembered he was away camping and tried to say I did it myself. I know that's impossible. You can't undress yourself and flip yourself upside down in that bag with it fully zipped. I haven't slept in a sleeping bag since. Skip ahead even farther. I was 22 years old, living in Beaverton, Oregon. It was a warm, clear summer day in August, and my friends and I were standing outside while they smoked and I soaked up the sun. We were in a semi-industrial area where a lot of big rig trucks passed through. That matters because we all knew what it felt like when one of those 18-wheelers drove by, and we'd even made a game out of guessing when one was coming. I started to feel the ground shake and could hear it approaching, but I was wrong. The clear blue sky formed a strange cloud, and that cloud opened. A giant fireball came flying down out of it. Judging by its size and speed, I thought we were about to die. I genuinely believed it was the end of Portland and Beaverton as I knew them. I turned to my friends and said, "We are about to die." People across from us at the Max stop were pointing and yelling. The owner of the building dropped his cigarette and just stood there in awe. As the roaring fireball raced toward the ground, we could feel the heat. The air had pressure. The ground was shaking. Maybe my legs too. Then, all of a sudden, it made a rapid 180-degree turn and shot back up into the sky faster than it had fallen, vanishing completely. One of my friends said, "That was a weird firework." We argued about it for 3 hours until I gave up and drove home. On the way, I called my dad and told him to turn on the news because something unbelievable had just happened. I explained everything. When I got home, there was nothing. No news coverage, nothing online. That was it. To this day, I have no idea what happened or what I saw. Story 10. My older brother managed to get a hold of me while I was living in Hawaii, which in itself felt like a supernatural occurrence. "Hey, I'm calling about Tony." Hearing him say that, I immediately thought, I hope he's okay. In that exact moment, standing near the beach in Hawaii, I saw 2 shooting stars streak across the sky and parallel. Then my brother said, "He has died." Strangely, I felt very calm. Even though I heard the words, I somehow knew Tony was all right. Tony's best friend, Eric, woke up the morning of Tony's death to milk his cows in Tillamook, Oregon. When he got the call from my older brother, Luke said, "Eric, I'm calling about Tony." Eric replied, "Yeah, he was just here helping me milk the cows." Luke said, "I don't know how. Tony died last night." The Sunday after he passed, my mom and sisters were at church. My mom saw Tony standing at the front near the altar. Tony said to her, "Wow, this is cool. I can see you, but you can't see me. Well, I've got to go." Then he disappeared. I believe there is an afterlife. Story 11. My grandmother had a heart attack, and I decided to take care of her. I come from a country where a relative is expected to stay at the hospital at all times. Throughout her stay, she was asleep and never woke up. I was very close to her, and it was no secret that I was the favorite grandchild. I had an aunt who was extremely hysterical at the hospital, crying beside my grandmother and saying things like, "Please don't leave us," and "We need you." One night, I think about 2 weeks into her coma, I had a dream where I was with my grandma. We were just sitting on a bench together, but I felt overwhelmingly sad. In the dream, she said, "Please tell your aunt to let me go. I am tired." I woke up crying and told my mom right away. She angrily went to her sister and told her to go back to the hospital and tell their mother that it was okay to go. My aunt did, and my grandmother died a couple of hours later. Also, just a few days into her hospitalization, my grandmother had whispered things like, "They're fetching me," and she would mumble responses such as, "Yeah, I am coming." I know scientists explain this as hallucinations, but seeing it firsthand made me feel certain that she was never going to wake up again. Story 12. Super late to the party, but maybe someone scrolling for fun will see this. I'm not sure if these are paranormal, but they're definitely weird. When I was in high school, I used to get together with some friends to play music. The friend's house where we met was in a cul-de-sac, up on a hill, with a flight of steps leading to the front door. After jamming for a while, I decided to head home around 9 or 10 at night. I had parked my car on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac. There weren't any street lamps except 1 or 2 farther down the road. When I reached the bottom of the steps, I saw a very large dark dog standing under one of the street lamps. I assumed it was a neighbor's dog and kept walking toward my car. When I glanced back, it was sprinting straight at me. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys like in the movies, and as soon as I got inside, I turned on the lights. By then, the dog should have been right next to the car, or at least nearby, but there was nothing. I even circled the cul-de-sac, checking the trees for this huge dog, and never saw it again. Later, when I asked my friend about it, he told me none of his neighbors owned a dog, and most of them weren't even home since it was mainly second homes. It's scared the pants off me, and I never went to his house again after dark. When I was in 6th grade, we lived in a house that definitely felt haunted. Nothing was outright terrifying, just strange. We stored our pots and pans on top of the fridge, and we would often hear loud crashing sounds, as if everything had fallen, only to walk into the kitchen and find them exactly where they belonged. One time, I was in the kitchen with my mom. She had her back to me at the stove, and I was standing at the counter. Suddenly, from the center of the kitchen, someone said, "Mom," very clearly. She turned around to ask me what I wanted and saw the look on my face. That really spooked us. The strangest thing, though, was when the crisper drawer from the fridge disappeared. We came home from vacation to find it gone, but all the food that had been inside was still there. At first we thought someone might have broken in, but nothing appealing like beer was missing. When we eventually moved out, my dad found the crisper drawer tucked away in an obscure corner of the garage. Story 13. When I was about 18 years old, I often walked home from a friend's house at night. The walk was around 5 kilometers, about 3 miles, through a rural area in northern Germany. There were no lights, only one road through the area, no cars, and everything was silent except for a few animals in the woods. Sometimes I felt a bit afraid walking home alone at night, especially when I heard branches cracking nearby, particularly if we had watched zombie movies beforehand. One night, though, something truly strange happened. For the blink of an eye, everything was bright as day. There was no sound, just sudden brightness. I wasn't blinded at all and could clearly see everything around me, but there was no visible source of light. Then it vanished as quickly as it appeared. This happened about 3 times that night. I ruled out lightning because the sky was completely clear, and the weather report mentioned nothing about storms. I asked some friends and my parents about it, but they just gave me odd looks and had no explanation. I knew there were some old army outposts in the area, including a so-called tank graveyard, but they had all been closed for many years. I still have no idea what it was. Story 14. When I was around 9 years old, I stayed at my cousin's house because my parents were in Cancun on vacation for the week. They dropped my dog off at my grandparents' house. On the first night they were gone, a Monday, I woke up at 2 in the morning, looked out my cousin's window, and saw my dog's face formed in the trees. I cried so hard that I woke up my cousins and my uncle, who calmed me down and put me back to sleep. I didn't hear anything from my parents or other family members for the rest of the week. When my parents finally got home, they sat my sister and me on the couch, and before they could say anything, I started crying again. My dog had passed away that Monday night. I've had family members and friends pass away since then, but I've never felt a presence leaving the way I did with my first dog. Story 15. A few years ago, my roommate at the time and I were driving to McDonald's through the back roads from our college apartment, passing through a neighborhood. As we drove past one house, a young boy suddenly ran out in front of my car, chasing a ball. I slammed on the brakes, stopping short so I wouldn't hit him. When the car came to a complete stop, my roommate and I looked up to make sure everything was okay, but there was no boy there, no child at all. We had both seen the exact same thing, and to this day, we have no idea what it was. Story 16. So, about 10 years ago, I was living in a shared housing situation. It wasn't a hippie thing or a frat thing, just where life landed me. I shared a large bedroom in a huge older house in the Pacific Northwest. If you've been out there, it was one of those woodsy modernist houses built in the 60s or 70s. If you're from the PNW, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. I had a computer on my side of the room because after getting off work, I usually came home before my literal roommate, the guy I actually shared a single room with, and I'd jump on the internet to watch adult entertainment. There wasn't much privacy in a shared room, so I made the most of the time I had alone. One day, though, I came home especially early. After taking care of business, I started looking up scary videos. At that point in my life, I had developed a strange fascination with all things terrifying. I read Jay's journal, a bunch of older Stephen King, and I'd go to a local obscure video rental shop to check out foreign horror films and underground stuff. Dark, scary, I don't know why. So that day I found myself ping-ponging through a ton of clickbait on different sites. Ghost videos, unexplained phenomena, demons on tape, and so on. I must have watched about 50 jump scare videos, and maybe 100 ghost videos, most of them obviously staged, some better done than others. Then, I came across one video. It was titled something like, How to Summon the Devil. I was curious, so I clicked it. It started with the classic black screen and white text, explaining that, for the video to work, I needed to stare at the screen without looking away, put on headphones, try not to blink, all that stuff. I figured it was just another jump scare, so I was a little tense while watching, but it wasn't that. Instead, it showed a rapid succession of random, clearly satanic symbols and images flashing on the screen. Everything was in simple black and white, a goat's head, I think, a Baphomet, some Hebrew letters, things like that. The whole time, there was a strange sound in the headphones, like an old recording being played backward. It was over in less than 2 minutes and ended with more text, explaining that I had just watched a spell video. The images were part of the casting, and the noise was the Lord's Prayer played in reverse. Then it said something along the lines of, "Sleep with one eye open tonight, for his advocate is now with you." It ended with, "You'll see what we mean." Lame. That's all I thought. In fact, my roommate got home and asked what I was doing, so I told him I was looking up scary videos. He said something like, "I don't know why you're so into that BS. You know it's all fake." I told him, yeah, I knew. I just thought it was fun or whatever. I want to be clear that out of the hours of videos I watched that day, this one was the least exceptional. As I kept clicking through more videos, I completely forgot about it. Truly, I did. I went out to dinner with a girl I was actually seeing and got into bed around 11 o'clock. A pretty typical night for a 20-year-old guy who worked on cars for a living. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. No Ouija boards, no tarot cards, none of that typical spooky stuff. So, I went to sleep. I had an old twin mattress from high school pushed up against the opposite wall from my roommate's queen mattress. Dave, my roommate, was a loud snorer and would sometimes wake me up, but I was used to it by then. At some point, I woke up from a completely dreamless sleep, lying on my stomach, but I was instantly wide awake. That felt strange by itself. I looked at the alarm clock next to my bed and saw the numbers 313 glowing back at me. I remember that very clearly. I also glanced over at Dave and could hear him snoring away. I wasn't scared or freaked out. I was just annoyed that I'd woken up when I had to be up for work in about 2 hours. I barely lifted my head off the pillow to look at Dave, then dropped it back down, trying to fall asleep again. Here's where things got weird. My comforter wasn't tucked in on the side of the bed that was pushed against the wall. Sometimes it would slide a bit if too much of it fell off the side, you know? Well, my comforter started to slide off of me. So with my eyes still closed, I reached out to grab it and pull it back into place before it fell completely off. That's when it hit me. I went from zero fear to pure, uncut terror in less than a heartbeat. I'm getting chills just writing this. It wasn't sliding. It was being pulled. I am not joking. Pulled. Every hair on my body stood on end as I froze, and then something grabbed my feet and yanked me toward the end of the bed. I grabbed the mattress with both hands and clenched my teeth and eyes shut, only to be instantly released. I opened my eyes. The clock now read 3:14. Dave's snoring was still steady and unbroken. Somehow, I was back in the exact position I had first woken up in, my comforter neatly on me, like nothing had happened. I'm no genius, but I am rational. As the chills slowly faded, the first thought that popped into my head was that How to Summon Satan video. I don't know why, it just felt connected. My next more reasonable thought was, that was just a nightmare, dude. Even though the room felt heavy with something negative, I talked myself out of it. I tried to go back to sleep, even though I was shaken and half tempted to wake Dave. But what would I even say? We were both blue-collar guys. He worked concrete construction, for Christ's sake. What do I tell a man who lost 2 fingers on the job and a front tooth in a fist fight? Hey man, I had a scary dream. Can you comfort me? No way. So I tossed and turned for what felt like an hour, convinced I wouldn't sleep again. But eventually I did. I woke, up again, on my stomach, to the sound of Dave snoring. The second my eyes opened, my comforter started to slide. I knew exactly what was coming. I grabbed both sides of the mattress and ground my teeth so hard I chipped one. Something grabbed me by the shoulders, lifted me up, and slammed me back down onto the bed so hard my nose started bleeding. The impact was loud enough to wake Dave. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. I broke down. I told him about the video, about what had just happened, and asked if he would pray with me. I am not religious, but I was genuinely terrified. He stopped me mid-prayer and asked, "Do you feel that?" The moment he said it, both of our hairs stood on end, and we got those deep, instinctual nightmare chills. Then he said, "I don't know what you did, but I want no part of it." He grabbed his pillow and blanket and left me there alone. I don't know why I didn't leave too. The room was huge, dark, and cold, and I was too scared to move. I didn't sleep until dawn. For the next couple of weeks, I was plagued by waves of fear and panic attacks. It finally started to fade about a month later, but I constantly felt watched. The paranoia ruined my relationship with the girl I liked. She said I had gotten weird and was always negative. That was 10 years ago. For the next 7 years, I'd occasionally tell the story to friends. When Paranormal Activity came out and the blanket scene happened, I mentioned it on a date. Over time, it went from something real to just a memory. I convinced myself it had been a night terror, until 3 years ago when I met a guy at an outdoor concert. No one I was with knew this story. So, it's late, and everyone is exchanging ghost stories. All of a sudden, this kid starts shaking and begins telling a story about how he and a friend watched a video one night. As he talks, my stomach drops. He describes the same video. Black and white imagery, rapid flashes, the Lord's Prayer played backward. Then he says, "The thing that really gets me, the thing that makes the hair on my arms stand up as his voice starts trembling." He says that at 3:13 in the morning, he and his friend were playing video games when the doorknob to the room they were in began to turn. They both froze as a wave of chills hit them. The door slowly opened, and they saw a large, shadowy figure, way too tall to fit in the doorway, bending down to look at them. It had one glowing red eye, nightmare fuel. Everyone started laughing and teasing him. "Red eye?" they joked. "If only demons weren't so Hollywood cliche," my girlfriend said. She didn't know what had happened to me 7 years earlier. That's when she noticed I was sweating and that all my hair was standing on end. She leaned over and whispered, asking if I was okay, telling me it was just a story. "No," I said, "it isn't." I looked at the kid and said the only thing I could manage, "I believe you." Since seeing that video, I've struggled with some pretty harmful, self-destructive behaviors. Addiction, deception, loneliness, trouble holding down a job. It's gotten a lot better over time, but for that kid, here's where it gets even weirder. He was arrested for murder a year after telling us that story. So, if anyone has seen or experienced something like this, please let me know. I'm not crazy or unbalanced. That kid convinced me that whatever it was something. Was it some kind of subliminal message that messed us both up? I honestly don't know, but that's my unexplainable story. If you've seen that video, please tell me your experience. Story 17. Okay, so does anyone here remember the ghost in a jar eBay phenomenon that was bid up to over $1 million? Well, the person who originally put it up was my grandpa. And here's the story for anyone who's intrigued. Before I start, I know a lot of people won't believe this. We've dealt with that our whole lives, so we're used to it. Back in the 1990s in the Mid-South, when I was just a baby, my grandpa liked to go exploring in the woods with his metal detector. This wasn't one of those fancy modern ones either. It was an old school kind that just beeped when it picked something up. One day, while walking through the forest, he came across an abandoned cemetery. The grass had completely grown over it and everything. Strange, but not even the worst part. He took some photos and went on his way. Not far from the cemetery, his metal detector picked up a signal, so like any normal person, he dug it up. What he found was a decayed wooden box. Inside were 2 jars and a journal. I don't know exactly what happened next, only that he took the box with him and started heading home. On the way back, he dropped one of the jars and a black mist-like substance came out and dissipated. I know that sounds like something from a TV show, but that's what happened. After that, he felt strange about the whole thing, but continued home with the journal and the other jar. Later that night, he started experiencing things. Shadows out of the corner of his eye. Strange sounds like a swarm of bees at his window or bedside, even though nothing was there. This went on for a while, until he oddly enough started getting used to it. Even my grandma, his wife, got so freaked out that she moved next door into their shop. One night when I was staying over, I was lying on the couch, half asleep, watching TV. Grandpa was nearby in his recliner, sound asleep. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something and turned my head. I swear I saw a face staring straight at me. Maybe it was my imagination, but I believe it had something to do with whatever was happening in that house. I pulled the blanket over my face, shaking, waited a few seconds, then peeked out again. It was gone. They lived way out in the country and only really had one neighbor, and there's no way anyone would have been messing around like that. That was the first and last time I personally saw it, but nearly everyone in my family who stayed there saw it at least once, if not multiple times. To this day, I still hate looking out open windows at night because I'm afraid I'll see it again. They eventually moved and the sightings mostly stopped. And for anyone wondering, yes, he still has the other jar and the journal, though they're pretty badly decayed now. Who knows if the other jar will ever break. Story 18. I've posted this a few times on Reddit now, but why not once more? My family and I were sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner and talking. Suddenly, in the middle of the kitchen and directly across from me, a loaf of bread that had been sitting on the counter appeared at ceiling height and then dropped straight to the floor. My dad, my sister, and I all saw it appear out of nowhere and fall. My mom had her back turned and didn't see a thing, and to this day, She thinks we're playing some kind of lame joke on her. This happened about 15 years ago, and we still talk about it occasionally. I chalk it up to some bizarre physics fluke, while the rest of them lean more toward ghosts. Story 19. One night when I was maybe 16, I was watching TV with my dad. We were the only ones home. At one point, I saw in the reflection on the TV what I thought was my sister walking behind me. At the time, it didn't register that we were alone. A moment later, it finally clicked. So I asked my dad if someone had just walked through the room. He said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was your sister." Then he paused and realized she wasn't home. We walked through the entire house together, but no one else was there. After that, we heard banging sounds off and on for the rest of the night. I don't really believe in ghosts, but that house is haunted as hell. That's just one of many stories from living there. Story 20. About 6 years ago, my wife and I were lying down in the back room watching movies. We were the only ones in the building that night, since everyone else was out of town on vacation. Our bedroom is on the first floor, adjacent to the gangway in the backyard. While we were watching movies, the motion sensor lights in the gangway turned on. I didn't think much of it, since it could have been the wind blowing leaves through there, which happens pretty often. The light turned off, but about 5 minutes later, it turned on again. This time, I looked out the back window to see if anyone was in the yard. I didn't see anything at all, except for the fact that the night was completely still. No trees moving, no water rippling in the pool, no reflective sheet shifting. Nothing unusual, nothing there. It happened one more time, and that's when I started to worry. I got up, went through the back door, down the stairs, and checked the yard to see if anyone was around. There was nothing, so I headed back to the door. As I turned around to lock it, every hair on my body suddenly stood up. It was the overwhelming sensation that I was being watched. I turned to look up the stairs, fully expecting to see something looking back at me, but there was nothing there. Even so, I could still feel a presence. That made me anxious because I had to walk up those same stairs to get back to my room. I did, slowly, very slowly. When I got back inside, my wife asked what was wrong. She could tell something had happened, but there was nothing I could say because technically, nothing had happened. I lay back down in bed with her, we put the movie back on, and after some time, the most startling thing occurred, something I still have no logical explanation for. Our bed is positioned against the wall that borders the gangway, and the first floor is about 10 feet above ground level. Out of nowhere, there was a loud, audible, and physical bang, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the outside wall. It hit so hard that the bed actually shook. I turned to look at my wife, and we were both completely confused, more than a little scared, and definitely not going back outside to see what it was. Since then, other things have happened. She claims to have seen a little boy in our apartment, peeking around the corner toward the back of our place. I saw the same thing, but I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. I couldn't even tell if it looked human. All I saw was something peeking around the corner, and when I went to make eye contact, it dashed away. There have been strange dragging noises across the floor at night. It seems to move around in different parts of the ceiling above us. Items have been thrown from the top of our fridge or from our pantry where we store food, but nothing violent. One of the strangest and honestly funniest parts is that when we're not home and our dog is left alone, my parents who live below us say they can hear the dog running back and forth, with his toys being thrown around as if he's chasing them. Story 21. A few years back, I spent some time traveling and ended up living in Istanbul with a couple of roommates in a 2-story apartment. I slept in a basement room that I shared with another girl, and our guy roommates slept just down the hall. I've had night terrors before, and I know they're scientific, so I don't really believe in the supernatural. But one night in that apartment, I woke up at 3:01 in the morning. I remember checking the alarm clock, and I immediately felt an evil presence in the room. There was a black shadowy thing with glowing red eyes crouched next to my bed, just staring at me. I was completely paralyzed. I felt this sickening sense of doom and tried desperately to reach for my phone, anything to wake myself up, to move, to make it go away. I'm not religious, but I started praying frantically. Finally, at 3:10, I felt it leave the room, and I could breathe and move again. I was wide awake and didn't sleep the rest of the night. I was completely shaken. On its own, this sounds like a typical night terror, except for what happened the next morning at breakfast. I was casually eating some Cheerios when my guy roommate, who lived down the hall from me, sat down and said something like, "Oh man, I had the worst nightmare last night." I woke up at around 3:15 and saw this ball of black with red eyes in my room, just glaring at me. I was paralyzed and couldn't move. It was awful. I told him what had happened to me, and we both completely freaked out. We slept with the lights on for quite a few nights after that. Story 22. This happened to me twice. I'm late, so I'll probably be buried and no one will read this. The first time, I was running to our car and I tripped and fell. But when I fell, I didn't see the ground rushing up at me. Instead, I saw myself fall and lie on the ground from outside my body. Then I watched my parents run over to grab me, and suddenly I was back in my head again. The second time was at recess. I was playing tag and went to tag a girl. We were behind some trees where we couldn't really be seen. When I went to tag her, she fell, and as I reached for her, I suddenly found myself standing at the entrance of the school, watching the scene from far away. From where I was, it looked like I had pushed her. Then, a second later, I was back in my body again, with her standing there talking to me like nothing strange had happened. Story 23. This one is just a really perplexing missing time thing. My significant other and I were at another couple's house for dinner. One moment, something was happening, and it was a certain time. Then, in what felt like the very next second, it was suddenly 2 hours later. It was completely unfathomable. The really weird part is that my SO experienced it too. We never figured out what to make of it. And just to be clear, there were no drugs involved. To explain a bit more, the other couple's reaction was strange in its own way. We said something like, "Wow, what just happened? Time passed so fast," and they just shrugged it off and said, "Yeah, time passes fast sometimes." Nothing dramatic at all. That's what makes it so unsettling. We felt that missing time so strongly, and they didn't seem to feel anything unusual at all. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Story 24. This happened around the beginning of January 2012. My cousin had just been hit by a car, and sadly he didn't make it. Shortly after we got the news that he'd been hit, my uncle called a family friend and told her what had happened. While he was on the phone with her, she said she needed to leave work because of the incident. That's when one of her coworkers suddenly started crying. Confused, the family friend asked why she was crying. The coworker didn't know my cousin, and she wasn't related to him in any way. Then she started describing him almost perfectly. His age, his eye color, and even his name. The woman then told the family friend that she needed to call my aunt, my cousin's mother, so she did. While they were on the phone, the coworker told my aunt, "Your son is scared right now. There's someone waiting for him. He's an older gentleman." My aunt, confused and already distraught, asked who he was and what he wanted. The woman replied that he was lost and needed to go. Then she said, "It's his grandpa. Tell him to go with him." At that point, my aunt completely broke down because just a few months earlier, her father, my cousin's grandfather, had passed away. What makes this so unsettling is how this woman knew so much about my cousin and somehow also knew about his grandfather's death, without having any connection to our family at all. Story 25. My son died in a car accident in 1992. By 2006, I was a foster parent for the first time, and the boy in my care was a huge music fan and musician. For weeks, Dustin kept asking about my son, Heath's taste in music. I told him that Heath liked all kinds of music and even loved rap, but Dustin kept asking specifically about Metallica. I couldn't remember if Heath had been a fan. One day I was out in the garage and accidentally knocked over a box. As I picked it up, a small piece of paper fell out from the top. On it was the Metallica logo doodled and the words "Master of Puppets" written in my son's handwriting. I realized then that Heath had been a Metallica fan, and his favorite song was Master of Puppets. For me, it felt like he was letting me know that it was okay to love and be a mom to another child again. Story 26. Saigon, Vietnam, 2014. I traveled to Vietnam for many reasons, but mainly to ride from Sapa down to Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City. It was a fun and difficult 5-week journey. During the trip, my friend Jackson and I met 2 British guys, Alex and Matthew, who were doing the same route. We met them about halfway through in Dong Hoi, and all agreed to ride together. After a couple of days, Alex started feeling sick and exhausted, so he decided to head back to London. That left the 3 of us to continue the journey. When we finally arrived, we decided to celebrate with food and beer. I'm a serious lightweight, so after 2 beers, I headed back to the hotel to sleep because the alcohol hit me hard. I later woke up and went outside, where I found Jackson and Matt sitting at a street corner bar, which is a very common sight in Vietnam. Plastic chairs and people drinking. Jackson was wearing white pants, so the large bloodstain on his knee was impossible to miss. I asked what had happened. Jackson told me that 2 locals had tried to rob him of his iPhone, so he and Matt chased them and jumped on their scooter. They were too drunk to give a clear explanation, but I believed them. Eventually, the night wound down, and we all decided to head back to the hotel. Jackson and Matt were staying in a separate room, 1 floor above mine. I was sharing my room with a friend I had met the night I arrived. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and all I wanted to do was check on the guys upstairs. As I opened my door, I was startled to see a hotel worker with his fist raised, just about to knock. We were both confused by the timing. He explained in Vietnamese, which I speak, that there had been some noise and that my friend was outside. I felt embarrassed, assuming my friends were just being loud and drunk, and that I'd have to herd them back inside and put them to bed. I was wrong. As I walked downstairs, I crept toward a lifeless body. I was completely mortified and terrified. Matthew had fallen from the hotel balcony. CPR did nothing. He was dead. I was heartbroken, and I still think about it regularly. After that traumatic experience, I would often wake up, from sleep at 3:30 in the morning. This is the first time I've shared my perspective on what happened. Story 27. When my sister and I were young, probably when I was about 8 and she was 10, we had 2 cousins from out of town visiting. We were all sitting at the dining table, putting together a huge puzzle. About 5 feet from the table was a door leading to our back porch. The wooden door was open, but the screen door was latched shut. We were all talking and helping each other with the puzzle when, all of a sudden, the 4 of us stopped talking at the exact same time. We looked up at the screen door handle and watched it slowly turn as the door swung open. We latched it shut again and just went back to what we were doing. It was bizarre, but not even that strange compared to the many paranormal experiences my sister and I had in the house we grew up in. Story 28. My family and I were spending winter vacation in a secluded group of houses up in the mountains in the south of Chile. I was around 13 or 14 at the time, and I chose the sofa bed in the living room. The living room was next to the kitchen, with no wall separating them. One night, while we were all asleep, the air extractor above the oven turned itself on. It was probably around 3 in the morning. That alone was unsettling, but when the dog started barking shortly after, it was enough to make all of us sleep in the same room for the rest of the night. That same year, in February, my mother couldn't sleep at all one night. She noticed an unusual number of birds flying around at about 3 in the morning, chirping as if it were already morning. A few minutes later, an 8.8 earthquake struck. Story 29. When we were in 10th grade, we decided to prank one of our teachers. There was a clock on the wall above the blackboard, and we all agreed before class that when it was exactly 10:20, we would all stare at the clock. Once he noticed and asked what we were doing, we'd tell him the clock was moving counterclockwise. We did exactly that. He asked what was going on, and then all of a sudden, the minute hand started ticking backward, 1 second at a time. It was really, really freaky. We couldn't wait for the class to end so we could run and tell the other classes what had just happened, only to find out that all the clocks in the school were doing the same thing. It took them a couple of weeks to get the clocks resynced. To this day, I get goosebumps every time I think about it. And yes, I'm totally aware of how ridiculous and impossible this sounds. If someone told me it happened to them, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But I was there, and there were about 25 or 26 people who witnessed it. Story 30. I was on my friend's back porch with him, sitting in his hot tub. We were drinking and smoking, but we knew his parents would eventually come home. So we turned all the lights in the house off. That way, if they arrived, we'd know right away. Through the windows, we suddenly saw the kitchen light turn on, and then the living room light shortly after. We immediately hid everything and got ready to see his parents. After waiting for a while and not seeing anyone, we went inside to check who was home. No one was there. He's an only child, and his parents were still out. 2 light switches were flipped on. We searched the entire house and found nothing. I've always been a pretty rational person, but I still have no idea what the hell would make something do that. Story 31. I have a mild case of schizophrenia, so from time to time, I'll see shadow-like animals running around, and sometimes they just stop and stare at me. I'll also occasionally hear short screams or yells that aren't words, or at least not in any language I recognize. Edit. This will probably be long forgotten now, but I've also noticed that I hear my name being called at random times. I'll look around, but there's never anyone there trying to get my attention. It happens far too often to feel like a coincidence. Story 32. My mother was on hospice care from a debilitating neurodegenerative disease that we were never able to get diagnosed. Possibly Creutzfeldt-Jakob, or ALS, according to what I was told over the phone by the doctor who visited her at home. But no tests were performed because she had developed a severe phobia of medicine and hospitals. Anyway, it took her 2 years to slowly lose her grip on reality and eventually die. 1 week she entered the final stages and went to sleep, likely never to wake up. She was breathing on her own, but could no longer eat, so it was only a matter of time. I drove to school that evening, around 5:30 p.m., and felt something shift inside me. I had an overwhelming urge to call my dad so I could say, "I love you" to my sleeping mom over the phone. I called and called, but no one answered. I couldn't go to class. I was too torn up. I knew she had died. I just absolutely knew it. and I felt like I was too late to say what I wanted to be my final goodbye. I was right. My dad called me about 15 minutes later to tell me my mom had died at 5:35 p.m. I'm an atheist and a rational, science-loving future doctor. But for the life of me, I can't explain how I knew. I've never had that feeling before. I don't know what triggered it, and I can't legitimately say I truly knew, but I knew. A small, somewhat uplifting addendum that I also can't explain. About 4 hours before she died, she woke up. My dad was at her side, and they had the first lucid conversation they'd had in 2 to 3 years. Her dementia was completely lifted. She knew who she was, where she was, and what was happening. They talked about old times and about raising me. It lasted about 20 minutes before she fell back asleep for the last time. I'm very grateful that my dad was able to truly talk to his wife again before the end. Story 33. There was one time I was hanging out with my boyfriend at the time, and he drove me home. My parents' bedroom window faced the front of the house, overlooking the driveway. As we pulled in, I saw my mom standing at the window. She waved at me, and I waved back. I could usually tell when my parents were watching TV in their room, because the light from it would glow through the window, and that glow was there. I opened the garage and noticed the family car was gone, the one we usually drove when they went out together. I assumed my dad had gone out with friends and taken the car while my mom stayed home. But when I walked inside, none of the lights were on. Not even in my parents' room. My mom wasn't home at all. They had both gone out together. I still can't explain who was waving at me. Story 34. My grandfather died when I was in my early 20s. The night we had the viewing, with the burial scheduled for the following day, I had a dream that my entire family and I were in the funeral home. In the dream, my grandfather stood up from the casket and came over to sit next to me. No one else noticed, and I wasn't scared. He leaned in close. I even remember smelling his scent, something I immediately recognized, and he told me not to worry, that he was happy and that he was going to be okay. After that dream, I felt an unexpected sense of peace about his passing. Story 35. I was about 1 or 2 years old, and I still remember this surprisingly vividly. My mom and her colleagues were having a barbecue that went on into the evening. Nearby, there were sloped areas with holes in them, and at one point during the barbecue, I started freaking out. In my memory, I was seeing snake-like creatures taunting me, sort of like the kaiju Gamera. I was terrified, even though no one else seemed to notice anything. There's another experience that's much hazier, but when my mom later retold the story, parts of it came back to me. My mom and I were walking home when I was around 2 or 3 years old. We passed a woman who was mourning a loved one beside a small makeshift shrine. For context, in Chinese tradition, people place food and candles so the spirits of the dead can eat. As we walked by, I pointed at an empty spot in front of the shrine. I don't really know the right word for it, in either Chinese or English, and said something along the lines of, roughly translated, "A man is eating." My mom was pretty spooked and sped up our pace. The best explanation I've heard is the superstition that toddlers and infants have yin-yang eyes, meaning they can see the dead until they grow out of it. Maybe there's something to that. Or maybe not. I'll probably never know. Story 36. My dad used to work in Brooklyn in the early 2000s as a pharmaceutical consultant. We lived out on Long Island, so he always left really early and got home super late. One day he had a meeting with a firm in Manhattan, but that morning his car got a flat tire and we didn't have a spare. So he called in, told his boss he was going to be late, and decided to take the train instead. While he was waiting for a cab to take him to the station, he was watching the news with my mom when they saw breaking news that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. The meeting he was supposed to attend that day would have been in one of the buildings. Story 37. When my grandmother passed away, there were a lot of arguments about how her things would be split up among the family. My brother and I weren't part of it, but the rest of the family was really vicious about who would get what. Anyway, my dad fought for me to get my grandmother's cello because I play violin, and, I mean, if you know one, you know them all. I was super excited because I had always admired the cello growing up. It had been my grandmother's since she was a kid, and it was given to her by her mother. I don't know much beyond that, except that her mother had it for a long time. And the cello is over a century old. Anyway, I brought the cello home, super excited, and immediately my Esso and my dog were kind of put off by it. I set it up on display in the living room and noticed right away that my dog would not go near it for any reason. My Esso didn't like the cello either, but he couldn't really pinpoint why. So after about a week, I decided I'd just move the cello into the closet. Once it was in the closet, my dog somehow knew and wouldn't go near the closet either. LOL. At that point, I figured something was going on, but I didn't have enough proof other than my dog being weird. I also didn't want to think that something of my grandmother's held any negative energy. One night, my SO and I were talking when we heard a super loud bang, like the whole closet system had collapsed. I was like, what the hell? And my SO was already freaking out because he kept telling me the cello was haunted, so I was left to go investigate. I went to the closet and swung open the door, and everything was fine. Nothing was out of place, nothing had fallen, and the cello was in its case exactly how I left it. I went back to tell my SO, and his face was white, like completely freaked out. He kept asking me, what was that? And did you hear that? What was that? Naturally, I didn't hear anything. He wouldn't believe me because he thought I was pranking him or something, and normally I would have accused him of pranking me, but his demeanor proved he was honestly shaken by what he heard. He said he heard a large, deep groan, like an old man exhaling, and that it filled the whole house. What he said next freaked me out because he said it so casually. When you open the closet, you let it out. I couldn't really be dubious anymore, and I had to admit the cello was haunted after that. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't trash the cello because it was all I had from my grandma. I considered giving it back to my relatives, but they all live really far away and I was too cheap to ship it. Also, they wouldn't believe me if I told them it was haunted, so there was that. I decided that maybe if I put a scapular on the cello, blessed it with holy water, and kind of did a Catholic exorcism ritual, it would release whatever negativity was attached to it. This method seemed to work for a while, and there were no super spooky events over the next week, other than the lights flickering constantly. I had them checked by a maintenance worker and replaced like 3 times before anyone asks. During this week though, my SO and I started having these awful dreams. One I remember really clearly is that I wake up in the middle of the night and it's pitch black. My SO isn't there. I get out of bed and see my dog cowering in the corner. I feel like something is wrong, so I go to the bathroom to wash my face. I try to turn on the bathroom light and it won't turn on, but I'm stupid. So I go inside the bathroom anyway. As I turn to leave, a hand grabs my shoulder and clenches it, physically hurting me, and it tells me that it won't let me go. I turn my head as much as I can through the pain and see that it's my grandmother. That was my dream, and I'd wake up in a sweat. This dream, and others, were recurring and happened every single night. I didn't get much sleep. During this time, my SO was having awful nightmares too, but he didn't tell me until much later. I didn't want to freak him out any more than he already was, so I didn't tell him about my dreams then. Smart. I know. The cello stayed in the closet for a couple of weeks, and then one day I went in to grab something unrelated and noticed the scapular I had wrapped around it was on the floor. This really bothered me. I questioned my SO, and he hadn't touched it. By this point, I was exhausted and upset. It had been about 3 weeks, and I had gotten very little sleep. I took the stupid cello out and put it back in the living room, and I remember staring at it for about 20 minutes from across the room, basically just thinking what the hell the entire time. The only time I ever felt normal was when I was outside the house, and I knew my dog was upset too, because she had started peeing in the house at night, even though she was fully potty trained. I decided to put the cello up for sale on Craigslist, and was about to go through with it when, the day before, my childhood friend called me out of the blue with a crazy story. It was around 10 p.m., and I remember feeling pretty good because I planned to sell the cello the next day. Then I got the call. She sounded really shaken, and she said, "I just had the craziest thing happen to me, and you need to be sitting. Tell me this isn't true." She began to tell me how she was on a work meeting, and for whatever reason, her colleague asked to invite her sister. As soon as the 3 women met, the sister said, "You're the one I'm supposed to meet. I've been looking for you." It turned out the sister was a psychic who had been receiving visions meant for my friend, but about someone else. The psychic told her she would know who the visions were for, but that all she could do was pass them along to my friend. The vision was of an old woman trapped under a mountain of stuff, being tortured, unable to get out. The woman wanted to leave, but she couldn't leave Earth because something evil was keeping her attached to an object that was very important to her. The psychic said the woman kept visiting her because she was in so much pain and needed to be released. I was pretty much shitting myself at this point. My friend told me she knew it was me automatically, and not because she knew my grandmother had just died, but purely because she felt it. Keep in mind, I hadn't talked to her about the cello at all. The last time I'd spoken to her was maybe a month before all of this. Not only did the vision make sense to me because of the attachment to the cello, but it also made sense because my grandmother was a hoarder, if there ever was one. After hearing this, freaking out even more, and telling my SO, we both decided that we needed to trash the cello, and we did. We took it to the garage, smashed it, and threw it away. After that, everything stopped. About a week later, my SO finally told me about the dreams he'd been having, and we were able to return to normal life. Believe me or not, this was the scariest and hardest time of my life. It was not fun. This is just a brief overview of everything that went down. Story 38. About 15 years ago, I was staying at the old hotel in French Lick, Indiana. It was March, cold, and very few people were staying there. My husband and I went to bed. He fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't sleep because of the noise in the hallway outside our room. It sounded like children, playing, running around, and bouncing a ball. It was getting late, after 11 p.m., and I was getting irritated that parents were apparently letting their kids run wild in the hall. Eventually, I decided to do something about it. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The noise stopped instantly, like someone had lifted a needle off a record. When I went to the door and opened it, no one was there. I still don't know what to make of it. Story 39. In high school, I lost a good friend in a car accident. I took it very hard and had trouble moving on. I became deeply depressed and struggled to function day to day. Then one night, I fell asleep and she was there, wearing one of her big, ridiculously fuzzy sweaters that had always been my favorite. She didn't say a word. She just gave me a huge, warm, fuzzy hug that seemed to last the entire time I was asleep. When I woke up, I felt completely changed. I felt wonderful, and everything seemed better. I've never had a dream as vivid and real before or since. Story 40. About a year before my grandfather passed away, he bought my grandmother these turn-on lamps that she loved. Both lamps were in the front sitting room, one directly beside her rocking chair and the other on top of the piano. Eventually, my grandfather ended up in the hospital and was dying from cancer. We all knew it was coming. He had been dealing with it for a couple of years. One day, my two brothers and I were at my grandmother's house with my mom, while my grandmother and aunt were at the hospital with my grandfather. My mother suddenly yelled at us boys and told us to stop turning on the touch lamps. The thing was, we were playing upstairs, nowhere near the lamps. My youngest brother said, "Wouldn't that be weird if Grandpa was trying to talk to us?" Shortly after that, my aunt called my mom to tell us that our grandfather had passed away. That really scared us boys. And even after he died, one of the lights continued to turn on by itself. My father, the skeptic he was, said it had to be the lamp. So he swapped the lamps without telling anyone. The same lamp still came on by itself in the spot next to my grandmother's chair. Then my father changed the power outlet, thinking that might be the cause, but it kept happening. Eventually, my grandmother rearranged the front room, and no matter where she put her rocking chair or which lamp was near it, it was always the lamp beside her chair that turned on by itself. After a while, my grandmother would talk to my grandfather when the light came on. That seemed to make it happen less. And when she wouldn't talk to him for a while, the light would start coming on again. I think it became a source of comfort for her and for all of us, just knowing that something of him might still be lingering in our lives. Story 41. My friend and I were asleep on a pull-out couch together when we were woken up around 6 a.m. by music absolutely blaring. It was the Zombies' song, "I Must Move." We both immediately started crying and covering our ears, which was such a strange reaction, especially the crying part. We started yelling at each other, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" while frantically grabbing every remote we could find, but every single electronic device was already off. Her other roommate woke up from our yelling and crying, and as soon as she crossed the threshold into the room, shouting, "What's going on?" the music stopped. I still have no idea where that music came from. Story 42. A lot of things happened to me in my childhood that were somewhat out of the ordinary. Aside from supposedly remembering having lived in a cave in a past life, I also recall two separate times. When I was pretty young, that time seemed to stop. The first time, I was in my front yard, under some trees, lying on my back and looking up. The wind was blowing pretty hard. This was western Kansas, and leaves began to fall from the branches toward me. Then they stopped. It was as though they were decelerating. Everything around me slowed until it felt completely frozen. But I was able to get up off the ground and look around. The whole experience lasted maybe 20 or 30 seconds, after which everything started back up again from its frozen position. The second time was a few years later. My mom worked at a small church thrift store out of an adjacent parsonage, but I hated the way the building smelled, so I stayed outside and played in the front yard. She told me to watch for a particular elderly church member and let her know when he arrived so she could help him unload donated items from his van. I ran around and played for about 20 minutes when that same feeling happened again, everything slowing to a stop. I looked over and saw the man's van coming around the corner, and above it, a bird hanging motionless in the air. I could still move like normal, but this time it felt longer. and I could hear something, like very distant wind chimes the entire time. Eventually, everything started moving again. I haven't had time stop like that in a few years, but I still hear the wind chimes sound at random, inexplicable moments. I've had my head examined, and there's no brain tumor or anything like that. It's still completely unexplainable. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.